This video is clarifying the word Davaoeño, alright? Because there is a lot of confusion with this word and what this word means. It's very, very, very versatile. Davaoeño with the enye and the letter V and the letter enye is the way it was spelled during the Hispanic times, and it's still spelled that way even today. For those who speak the Filipino language or languages that don't have the letter V or the enye, right, it's spelled this way, Davaoeño, okay? Now, with the Davaoeño noun, we can refer, or we can look at this word in two aspects, right? In terms of the people and in terms of language. Okay, so Davaoeño, let's start with the people first because this is going to be an interesting one. So I actually ran out of ink for the for the first part of this, so I used red. But when we talk about Davaoeño, we talk about the people, the Davaoeño people, right? It's going to be the name of the people, the original inhabitants of the Davao region, right? And what do we call those original inhabitants of the Davao region? We call them Davaoeño, right? The Davaoeños. And who are these original inhabitants? Well, they're the native tribes in the region, right? The natives and the tribes in the region. So even before pre-Hispanic times, like people, and during Hispanic times, people just didn't know what to clump them as. So these tribes can be like your typical Mandaya, Mansaka, those kind of Bago speaking tribes, right? They're just the original people in that area that were just collectively called, okay, in general, collectively called the Davaoeño. Now, when Davao City started booming, you know, when a lot of people started coming into the Davao region, especially after or during the Marcos regime, or before and after, I guess, during the Marcos regime, before that, after that, and the mass immigration into Mindanao from the Visayan region came into play. Most of these people brought with them their local language. So languages like Hiligaynon and Cebuano, they all just came and brought their language with them into Mindanao. Much of this has a lot of influence in Davao now. So aside from the original inhabitants, you have inhabitants, immigrants, migrants that moved into the Davao region. Well, in general, they moved into Mindanao. And it's not just Davao, but other cities were affected too. And because of that, they brought on their language, and those languages just kind of became this lingua franca, which is the commonly used language of the area today. And it's kind of like the language it's the language that people use to communicate with each other if they don't speak the same language, or a different regional language, or tribal language, or native language, so to speak, right? So it's now, this Davaoeño term now evolved into anyone from Davao City or anyone from the Davao region, right? It doesn't matter if you were native there, it doesn't matter if you were born there, or if you've lived there your whole life, you know, or you're just transient there and you call Davao your home, you immigrated, you're an immigrant to Davao, and you call Davao your home, you are now a Davaoeño, okay? So, for example, me, you know, my family is from Davao. I call myself a Davaoeño, even though I wasn't born in Davao, but most of my time in life is related in Davao. So I proudly call myself a Davaoeño. It's interesting to see too, because people change this word a lot. Oh, you know, Davaoeño can nowadays Davaoeño is just anyone from Davao. So it's a very, very inclusive term, and it includes a lot of people, right? It can even include the Bago speakers or the Mansaka speakers. Now, keep in mind, like the Bago and the Mansaka speakers, the Bago and Mansaka languages are kind of like a little language group. With their group of languages, kind of like a language family, right? A little subfamily within a language branch of families, right? The little subgroup within a larger subgroup, okay? And, you know, examples of the Bagokbo would be the Tagabawa or the Agyangan Bagokbo. Sometimes they're just collectively called Bagokbo, right? The Mansaka language, it's like a family of languages, like the Kamayo, Mansaka, Mandaya, right? They're all just related to each other in that little family of languages, right? And these, even though they're spoken in the area by not a lot of people, people can still call them Davaoeño because they're in the Davao area, right? Just as the immigrants and the migrants of influx, the influx of migrants just coming in can call themselves a Davaoeño. So that kind of just falls under the aspect of people in terms of Davaoeño as the demonym, okay? The demonym. Now, it doesn't matter if you were a Japanese or a Hispanic or a Chinese born Filipino in the Davao region, call yourself a Davaoeño. The language, it plays a big part of what the Davaoeño word can mean in terms of the linguistic aspect, okay? So, three categories that we can look at the Davaoeño language in is first the Cebuano language. Cebuano is a Visayan language, and when the migrants came to the Davao region of Mindanao and other parts of Mindanao, especially in the north and the eastern part, a lot of these migrants were from Cebuano-speaking areas of the Visayas, so they brought over their Cebuano language with them. Over time, this Cebuano language evolved into the local variety, right, of the region. So it didn't really diverge, it just kind of evolved on its own to become a dialect of the Cebuano language. So the Cebuano language spoken in Davao is called the Davaoeño dialect of Cebuano, right? It's a Cebuano dialect of the Cebuano language, right? So you can be speaking the Cebuano language and have a dialect of it. So you can be speaking Cebuano with a Davaoeño dialect, you can speak Cebuano with a Bolanon dialect, you can speak Cebuano with a Cebu Metro City dialect. So it just all depends, right? That's why in Cebuano there is a standard dialect that everyone adheres to. Otherwise, other Cebuano speakers sometimes have a hard time understanding other speakers. I know when I was in Bohol as a Davaoeño, when I went to Bohol, I kind of had a hard time with the Boholanos because their dialect is a little deep, so it's a little thick. The accent is thick, but I still got by. And we both speak Cebuano. The Davaoeño dialect of Cebuano is closer to standard Cebuano, actually. But collectively, Mindanao dialects of the Cebuano language are more closer to the standard language than it is to the Cebu City dialect. This is just an observation I see. Because when I travel, I hear people and and the Davaoeño dialect of Cebuano is used as a lingua franca in the region, the Davao region at least. So it's best to know Cebuano when you're going into that region because a lot of people are gonna have a high degree of bilingual fluency in Cebuano, right? But that doesn't mean that if you speak a Davaoeño dialect, you're not gonna understand other dialects of the Cebuano language. It's just you speak that dialect of the Cebuano language. So it is a Cebuano dialect of that language. We can look at Davaoeño linguistically as the Chavacano language too. Now, for those of you who don't know, Chavacano is a Spanish Creole spoken in the Philippines, primarily in Cavite, Ternate, and Zamboanga Peninsula. There were some speakers in Cotabato, which I think they're dying out, or it probably dead already or extinct. But the Chavacano that was spoken in Davao no longer exists, or at least I don't hear it anymore and no people speak it anymore, right? So I guess it's safe to say that the Chavacano dialect in Davao is extinct and dead. It doesn't exist. Because most of the inhabitants have, again, remember the lingua franca, most of them have shifted to the Cebuano language, specifically the Davaoeño dialect of the Cebuano language, right? So most of them have shifted to that lingua franca in terms of economic use and popular and majority language, right? So this Chavacano dialect, right, even though the language is the Chavacano language, the Chavacano spoken in Davao had its own variety, and it was called the Chavacano de Davao, or Davaoeño Chavacano, hence Davaoeño, coming from Davao, right? It's that demonym or that name coming from Davao, a Davaoeño, right? So You can have Chavacano spoken in Zamboanga called Zamboangueño, right? You can have Chavacano spoken in Davao called Davaoeño. You can have Chavacano spoken in Cotabato called Cotabateño. And you can have Chavacano spoken in, I don't know, in Ternate or even Cavite and Ermita, which no longer exists. So they're respectively called Ternateño, Caviteño, Ermiteño, right? It's that demonym again. So the Chabacano that was spoken in Davao was called Davaoeño, right? It's Chabacano de Davao or Davaoeño Chabacano, right? And that's just one aspect of the Davaoeño language. When people mean Davaoeño, oh, okay, so you could refer to it as this, or that, or, it just depends. And this is why the video is going to demystify that word. And lastly, this is probably the most weird and unique situation, which I really despise personally, I hate, but it needs to be said. As you know, one of the official languages of the Philippines is Filipino, and it's not Tagalog. Filipino and Tagalog are not really, but are the same-ish in a way. Filipino is based off of the Tagalog language, right? So it has its roots and its basis on the Tagalog language. But Filipino has the goal of evolving as it incorporates more languages and more vocabulary and whatnot when it evolves. So that said, the Filipino language can include English and other languages around the world and regional languages. Now, because as a consequence to all the immigrants and inhabitants and people that are migrating into the area of Davao, they bring with them their languages as well, right? So this isn't an exhaustive list, but you got Filipino language speakers, English language speakers, because English is also an official language co-official with Filipino, Cebuano language, the Tagalog language, you've got the Hiligaynon language, and you've got so many other regional languages, right? Now, Davao is looked as a kind of diverse melting pot kind of place where a lot of migrants and a lot of diversity come into play. It's not just them, but you also got like the Chavacano speakers that come in from the West. You've got the Muslims that speak their own regional language coming in, right? So that kind of spices up that local area's language, right? And because of that, as a consequence, this whole area, the whole Davao area, has this unusual mixture of all of these languages, right? So in a sentence, you can hear someone speak like one sentence that uses 4 or 5 different languages, right? And they're all mixing it, they're all code switching it, they're all just kind of mixing everything. And that is considered to be a dialect of the Filipino language, right? Because the Filipino language has dialects, the Davaoeño dialect of it, right? Because the Filipino language has different divergence. One of the dialects of the Filipino language is the Davaoeño dialect of the Filipino language, which is a type of Filipino dialect. And this is just the variety that's spoken in Davao. Since it's a Filipino dialect called Davaoeño, right? The Filipino of the area, you're expected to have an understanding, or other regions are expected to have an understanding or understand the Davaoeño dialect of the Filipino language, which is weird, right? Because not everyone is going to speak that same dialect or understand those words and whatnot, which it's a big mess with the Filipino language. It really is. But other dialects of the Filipino language would include it would include Taglish, right? Tagalog and English mixed together. That is a type of Filipino dialect, right? Because the Filipino language, again, it's supposed to evolve, and it has the basis of Tagalog. So Taglish is a dialect of the Filipino language, and apparently Taglish and the Davaoeño dialects of the Filipino language are supposed to be mutually intelligible with each other, but apparently, if you only know Tagalog and English, you won't understand the Davaoeño dialect of the Filipino language, which is going to suck to you. And that's, again, it's one of the nightmares of creating the Filipino language, which to me, I think is a failure. So whoever invented the Filipino language and had its goals, you fucking failed. The next thing is that even though that this dialect is prevalent in Davao, it's also looked bad. It's also looked down upon, especially since it's not an original. It's not one of the original languages. It was just kind of like a created language, a pidgin language, so to speak, or even a Creole language, maybe. But, that's how a language evolves, and it's how a language merges, and it's how a language grows. So it's totally up to the people to make it happen and make it so. I don't know what else I can explain about the Filipino dialect in Davao, or the Davaoeño dialect of the Filipino language. But in this video, again, I hope this can clarify or demystify the whole Davaoeño word, right? Because you can have Davaoeño to mean the Cebuano dialect spoken in the dialect of Cebuano spoken in Davao, known as Davaoeño Cebuano, the extinct Chavacano language, or the dialect of Chavacano spoken in Davao, known as Davaoeño Chavacano, or the the Davaoeño dialect of the Filipino language spoken in Davao, known as Davaoeño. And in terms of people, it's just whoever is in the region, the Davao region, they can call themselves Davaoeño. I hope this actually demystified a lot of what's going on, because I do see a lot of misinformation and confusion over this word.